Welcome back to Hoffman Tactical. Today's video we're going to be discussing the filaments that I use on a regular basis and why. So I have a number of filaments right here. I have a bunch more around the shop. I've purchased a lot of filament. I have tested quite a bit of it and I have printed with a lot of it. However, I want to just preface the video by stating that there are a lot of other filaments out there I have not tried. And also my testing methods are not perfect and I still have a lot to learn. So don't take this filament advice as absolutely written in stone. Just because I recommend a particular filament doesn't mean there isn't a better filament out there you could try. So this is, I think, a good starting place if you're looking for a filament to use. However, experiment with other filaments and see what works for you. And if you do find something that you think is better, be sure to leave it below in the comments so that I can also check it out and try it. Okay, let's jump in. So I'm going to start with, I think, the most deserving filament to be talked about, and that is the PLAs. So PLAs are incredibly popular for a really good reason. They get a bit of hate from some people, but that is not correct and misplaced. So we're going to be discussing PLA. When I say PLA, I refer to PLA, PLA Plus, Performance PLA, High Heat PLA. All in one category. So I think I should just briefly mention the two different types of PLA, and that is plain PLA or original PLA, which tends to be brittle, it breaks easily, it's actually very strong, but it has poor impact resistance, very little plastic deformation, so it cracks and breaks easily. That's plain PLA. Performance PLA or PLA Plus is a PLA that has generally speaking, it's a bit weaker, much higher impact resistance, really the highest impact resistance of the majority of 3D printing materials, and it also has a more plastic deformation. So when you break it, it doesn't snap, instead it just kind of bends. So that is what PLA Plus is, and there's all kinds of stuff in between from PLA to PLA Plus. So I just wanted to say that real quick because I'm going to mention both a plain PLA and a PLA Plus. So for plain PLA, which generally speaking I only use this to print things like business cards or like clock face type dials, things like that. I keep a roll of flat dark earth and a roll of black. This PLA is from Push Plastic. So Push Plastic is a supplier I buy a lot of my filament from. So Push Plastic, this is the plain PLA. I use it for printing, as I said, stationary type items, not structural items that are going to take a lot of stress or I can't have break. This stuff here I print with a bed around 60 to 65 degrees Celsius and a nozzle around 210 degrees Celsius. That is what I print this at. 200 degrees Celsius nozzle will probably work just fine. 200 to 215 for PLA doesn't even make too much of a difference actually. For PLA Plus, don't have an example on the table here, but for PLA Plus, I have tested quite a few of them, like 3 of them so far. I have not tested Polymaker PLA Plus, which I'd like to do, but what I recommend, if I was going to print, for example, a lower receiver, I would use Keen Village Plastic Performance PLA. It has excellent impact resistance, very good tensile strength, incredible layer adhesion compared to other PLA Pluses that I've tested. It's got good layer adhesion, and it has slightly higher heat resistance, possibly. It's designed so it can be annealed. A lot of PLA Pluses say that nowadays, so I don't know how relevant that is. It supposedly crystallizes at a lower temperature more easily for annealing purposes. But that is the PLA Plus I would recommend. I just want to quickly state that I actually have a roll of PLA Plus right back there that I am using. It is the 3D870 PLA from NatureWorks, and it's sold through Push Plastic. NatureWorks is a plastic maker, not a filament maker. They make the resin that the filament's made from. I bring that up though because the 3D Fuel PLA, which is, I've seen a lot of people recommend to me recently, I've looked at it, it's made from the same stuff as the 3D870. The 3D870 back there right now is printing the little handles for the bushing installation tool that I use in my kits that I send out. So those little handles work great for that. However, I've noticed that while it has excellent impact resistance, better than the Keen Village actually, it has excellent tensile strength, or reasonable tensile strength comparable to the Keen Village. However, it has really bad layer adhesion. I've chronically had issues when I try printing lowers and other parts from it around the pistol grip and other areas where you have stresses with your layers. The layers tend to peel apart. That is and in testing it also shows having weaker layer adhesion. So because of that, I can't recommend it for general purpose use. For specialty stuff, yeah, it works, and I use it because I can buy it on bulk rolls. However, I don't recommend it. So Keen Village Plastic Performance PLA, I print, that's what I recommend, and my print temperatures for the nozzle are around 210 degrees Celsius, so same, and my bed is once again between 60 degrees Celsius and 65 degrees Celsius. I don't think it really matters that much, but that's what I use. Let's now move on to, I think, the next important filament category, which is carbon fiber nylon. PLA Plus has one major drawback. That drawback is a lack of heat resistance. If you place it in a hot car, the temperature goes above like 130 degrees Fahrenheit, it tends to soften up, it warps, pins shift around. It's a big problem. If it weren't for that problem, we would be using PLA Plus for everything. I would never look at a different filament except for TPE, which we'll talk about later. But it is really awesome stuff because other than that temperature resistance issue. Finding a filament that has all the same good properties and also has good temperature resistance is actually a bit of an issue. But I think carbon fiber nylon is really the best thing to fit that goal. So if I'm going to print a lower receiver and I want it to be tough, durable, strong, long-lasting, I have an example right here of a carbon fiber nylon lower. I'll use carbon fiber nylon. So here I have 3 examples of carbon fiber nylon. One of them I prefer, the other 2 I don't. The first one is Matter Hackers Nylon X. I don't care for it that much because it's mostly because it's overpriced, and the surface finish isn't absolutely the best compared to my favorite one. So I think it's just kind of overpriced. It does work. It does have nice, good tensile strength, good impact resistance, good layer adhesion. It is not a horrible filament. It's just expensive. Then moving on to the next category right here. This is Atomic Filaments Nuclear Nylon, and this stuff right here is the strongest filament I've actually tested to date, I would say. It is really interesting because it has a very high carbon content. It's like 20% compared to 10% for the Nylon X or something. I don't even know what the Nylon X is, but it's something lower. The problem I have with this stuff here is the high carbon content makes it incredibly strong. However, it greatly reduces the impact resistance. This stuff is not that impact resistant, and it also, for some reason, reduces the layer adhesion. So this stuff does not have very good layer adhesion, which is not a good thing. Also, it causes 0.4 millimeter nozzles to clog on a pretty regular basis, which is a serious pain for printing detailed parts like lowers with. So I don't recommend the Atomic Filaments Nuclear Nylon, and I also don't recommend other super high carbon fiber nylons. Like if you see stuff advertised as like a black aluminum, they are really, really strong, I will say that. And they are good for some things. Like I actually use this for some things. If you need a really strong part, yes, I would use this. However, for my everyday printing, for printing lowers and other parts, I always use the Push Plastic carbon fiber nylon from Push Plastic. It is still pretty expensive if you buy it in small rolls. If you buy it in bulk, it's a bit cheaper. However, it has a lower carbon content. It has an incredible surface finish compared to any other. Most fiber-filled nylons, especially glass fiber, have a rough surface finish. Just something in the hand is smooth. There's no fibers. It doesn't bother your skin at all. It's really, really nice surface finish. It's like over 10,000 psi tensile strength, so it's plenty strong. Has very good impact resistance. Not as good as PLA Plus, obviously, but it's still very good. And it also has excellent layer adhesion. Like very good layer adhesion, better than PLA Plus. It's very respectable, and it prints without warping. So this is what I would recommend. My print settings are, I run the nozzle at 270 degrees Celsius, though I believe 260 degrees Celsius would actually print just fine. I should experiment with that. The manufacturer recommends like 245 to 260, which seems really low. I don't think it would print too well at 245. However, I think it would print fine on 260, so keep that in mind. And for the bed, I run at 35 degrees Celsius, and that is not me misspeaking. 35 degrees Celsius is key to not getting this stuff to warp. So that is what I recommend. Push Plastic carbon fiber nylon is the ticket if you want heat resistance, strength, impact resistance, and layer adhesion. This is what I would use. This is my go-to filament if I want a strong functional part. This is the stuff I will use. So that is that, and I think we can now move on to the next category, which is glass fiber filled nylon. Okay, glass fiber filled nylon, I just want to say here, I actually do not use this stuff on a regular basis. I believe in my testing, I have tested a couple of these so far, glass fibers, and the carbon fiber nylon has better tensile strength, better layer adhesion, almost as good impact resistance, just prints better surface finish. I prefer carbon fiber, I think it's better. However, I haven't tried all the glass fibers yet, so I just want to briefly mention them. Right here, I've got a couple glass fibers, Nylon G, and this one is the Polymaker PA6 glass fiber. Both of these, I just wasn't that overly impressed with. I think they will both work. You could both make lowers with them, make functional parts, but I think you'd be better off with carbon fiber. Now, the last one here is one I just actually printed a lower receiver from. This is the Toloman, this is a Toloman 3D glass fiber alloy nylon. and it is actually printed really nicely. I just printed this double rib lower, and yes, that weapon is loaded. I'm not pointing at you though. So it is very printed very nicely, didn't warp at all. I printed it at 260 degrees on the nozzle and 35 degrees C's on the bed, and it printed beautifully. So if you want to experiment with glass fiber nylons, I don't know how strong this is, I don't know what the impact resistance is, don't know what the layer adhesion is. It all appears pretty good just by looking at parts I've printed by it, but I haven't tested it yet. But I would recommend, if you want to try a glass fiber nylon, I would definitely recommend the Filament 3D glass fiber alloy nylon, because it does print nicer, has a better surface finish, and it appears all around better than the other two glass fiber nylons I have tried. So that's what I would try as far as glass fiber nylon goes. However, if I'm going to actually print a part, if I'm going to print a lower for myself, I will be printing it from a carbon fiber nylon, not a glass fiber nylon. This video is supposed to be just discussing filaments I use on a regular basis, and we're going to get back to the last two filaments that I like to use on a regular basis. However, since we did talk about glass fiber nylon, I think I should just throw an honorary mention for plain nylon in here. This is unfilled nylon, and I have a couple rolls of it here. I have one roll I don't have here, but because I used it all up, but that's alloy, that's Overture Easy nylon. So this is the Matter Hackers Pro nylon. It's garbage. I have never been able to print with this. It warps horribly no matter what I do, so I don't recommend that. Alloy 910, I have mixed feelings about this. This is my second roll. The first roll I bought, I was never able to get any real parts to print successfully. It always warps, like no matter what I do. Not that badly sometimes, but it still warps. Don't know why. However, it is quite strong, very strong. It has excellent layer adhesion and reasonable impact resistance. Actually, impact resistance is not that good, but it seems to be really tough stuff, very abrasion resistant, and it is strong. So it appears to have good mechanical properties. That's why I bought a second roll. However, I've just had problems printing with it. So if you want to play with it, you can play with it, but I just would not recommend it if you want to have a filament which you can print with. The last one is the Overture Easy nylon. Prints beautifully. It's zero warping. It prints really nice. I haven't done much testing with it, but it appears to have excellent impact resistance. I printed my AR9 lower from it. However, it does have a serious issue, which I have to kind of look into some more, and that is the problem of creep. And you can see this magazine catch right here has bent up. That's because the spring force pushing the plastic over a few weeks slowly caused the plastic to basically flow under the spring force and bend up. So that's not permanently bent that way. It's not sprung up like that. That's actually that catch is permanently bent, and that's because the Overture Easy nylon has creep issues. This entire lower is printed from it. It appears really tough. The reason Overture Easy nylon intrigues me so much is it prints at like 255 degrees Celsius without a hardened nozzle on an ordinary bed at 35 degrees Celsius with a little glue stick, just fine without warping. That sounds like an Ender 3, right? So it's something you can print on like a stock, any stock printer, and it has potentially, I haven't done much heat deflection testing with it, but it definitely has better heat resistance than PLA+. So I was thinking it was a higher temperature option, alternative to PLA+. However, we need to work out this creeping issue before I can recommend it. So Overture Easy nylon, if you want to experiment and play around with the nylon, because it is very abrasion resistant, I would try Overture Easy nylon. I think it's something to look at. I was very intrigued by how easy it printed. So a little honorary mention there of our plain nylons. Okay, let's move on to the last rigid filament which I use on a very regular basis. That filament is polycarbonate. So I have two different polycarbonate blends right here, and I actually have a third roll up on the shelf of a plain polycarbonate. However, I want to discuss them. This one here is the Prusa polycarbonate blend. I use this just for kind of odd jobs and stuff, little parts. I found that it warped horribly, and I was never able to really print any larger parts with it. It just warped really badly. It does appear really strong though, so interesting stuff, but it just warps from Prusa. I don't know why, but it warps. The filament that I use, the polycarbonate blend I use every day to print a lot of the parts I ship in my kits, is the polycarbonate PBT blend from Push Plastic. So PBT stands for polybutyl something or other, but it's a plastic that is oil resistant, and it's a little more ductile, and it makes the polycarbonate really easy to print with. I actually have purchased up on the shelf that I have it a roll of plain polycarbonate from Push Plastic, which is stronger, significantly less impact resistance, and it warps a lot more. So this particular blend right here, I have actually printed several lowers from it. I have an example right here. This is a lower. I took the mag catch out of it just earlier. I needed the mag catch. But this is a polycarbonate lower. It has held up right here, and you can see it has a bit of a curve on the bottom right there where it warped, but it did work. Printed this is like a year old now from the polycarbonate blend, but I would not recommend it. So the reason I use this stuff, I use it for small parts that require metal contact. So parts that can't be gummy. The problem with, so it's complicated. The reason, I'm trying to think what I would recommend for you to print with this stuff. I don't think there's really anything I would recommend you to print with the polycarbonate, with the exception of like the front takedown pin plates. I've been looking into using nylons as an alternative to this polycarbonate because I think they have a better impact resistance. The polycarbonate tends to have poor impact resistance and is actually kind of prone to cracking. However, it has great tensile strength. It machines really nicely, which means they can ream the plates out easily and get smooth, consistent fit, and it doesn't gall that badly. So with nylons, you can tend, you're putting pins in and out, they tend to like catch on the nylon and like it's hard to get them in and out. This stuff doesn't do that quite so much. Also, it doesn't warp when you're printing small parts with it. And it has very high heat resistance. Because of all those reasons, I use it to print the front takedown pin plates. And it's really hard. And hard is good for parts like that because you have metal sliding. It doesn't gall, like I just mentioned. So this is the polycarbonate blend I use. I use this for some forced reset parts. I think it works pretty good for some of those. For little mechanical parts that have to interact with each other, that need to be rigid, that need to be hard, I think this is a really good option. Push plastic polycarbonate PBT. I print it with the nozzle at 280 degrees Celsius and the bed at 120 degrees Celsius. And little parts print great. I would recommend using a draft shield. But for printing lowers, I wouldn't recommend it. Just smaller mechanical parts, I would recommend this. Okay, with that said, that leaves us with one more filament, and unfortunately it's on the printer printing right now, and that is a TPU. So I've tried a couple TPUs. I've tried the Filamentum Flex Fill. It was a 98A filament. I found it too hard to be that useful for flexible parts. So my go-to flexible filament now for printing butt pads, like this one right here, right there, and also for printing things like my impact tester. I have a rubber bumper on it. I use the Ninja Flex. I think it's the original Ninja Flex filament. And what company is that? Is it just plain Ninja Flex? It might just be Ninja Flex. Anyway, I use the Ninja Flex flexible filament because it prints really nicely. I haven't really had any clogging or jamming issues with it and my Prusas, and it's actually really soft. So that's what I recommend for a flexible filament. I think they have one level even more flexible. I'd like to try, might be worth trying, but the Ninja Flex their soft filament, the TPU, I think is really cool stuff, and that's what I recommend for flexible filament. Okay, so let's totally summarize the filaments I recommend for printing lower receivers. Basically, Keen Village Plastic, PLA, but Performance PLA is what I recommend in the PLA category. My recommendation for the best filament you can get, that's the easiest to print filament, that's the easy to print in any printer, relatively low cost filament. It's actually pretty expensive, but that's what I recommend. If you want the best that I think can provide right now, that I know of, that can be printed on home printers with a little bit of mods, is the Push Plastic Carbon Fiber Nylon. That is what I would consider the best option right now. You're going to need a high temperature hot end probably. You might be able to get away with a stock like Ender hot end and only run it at 260. I think it would actually work, but you're definitely going to need a hardened steel nozzle or a tungsten carbide nozzle, which is what I use to print this stuff with, because it will wear out brass nozzles probably in the length of a print, or at least a couple prints. It is pretty abrasive. So other than that hardened nozzle and possibly all metal hot end, this stuff is really easy to print with and has beautiful surface finish. So this is my #1 go-to filament. Other than that, the glass fibers, the polycarbonates, the plain nylons, those are all proliferate things to experiment with. Right now, this is what I recommend as the #1. I want to mention a really niche purpose, and that has to do with my AR9. I have an ejector on that AR9 if the shells hit, and that has to be abrasion resistant. I actually use Ultra Easy Nylon for that. I think it's a really good option, and I think the carbon fiber nylon here would probably be just as good an option, but I'm not sure. So that might be something a plain nylon might be good for. But I think that you can hit all your bases using this carbon fiber nylon for Push Plastic. Okay, and then the last thing, of course, you want a flexible filament, Ninja Flex. I find a great flexible filament. Other than that, my advice would be, a few things. Basically, I didn't even mention PETG here because PETG really sucks. I know people think it doesn't. They think it's really tough and really good stuff, but PETG is weak. It's got poor tensile strength. It has horrible impact resistance. It just loves to shatter. And people are probably laughing in the comments. Try printing a big part from it and just throw it in the floor. That's a good way to illustrate. It'll shatter. PETG is brittle. It does print pretty nicely, I will admit. But other than that, like, I just think it's bad stuff. It has poor mechanical characteristics across the board. ABS does have its place sometimes. I wouldn't recommend it for roller related stuff, but if you need to like vapor smooth something, yes, it can be interesting. It has a niche purpose, I think. So the one other thing, of course, when it comes to PLA pluses, there are tons of options. I think a lot of them are actually really good, solid options that will work. However, eSun PLA Plus is the cheapest PLA Plus I would use. There are some companies that sell like 10 rolls of PLA Plus for like $10 a roll or even less. I would totally stay away from that stuff. I can think of a couple examples right now where people have emailed me with broken lowers and they had a brittle looking break. I'm like, is that PETG? And it turns out it was actually the really cheap PLA Plus. So do not use that super cheap stuff. $20 a roll for eSun PLA Plus. I don't think eSun is the best. It tends to not have as good impact resistance in my testing. However, go with eSun PLA Plus. Go with Polymaker PLA Plus. Go with Keen Village Plastic Performance PLA. Go with one of those better PLAs, and I think you'll be well served. So stay away from the cheap PLA. Well, there you have it, guys. Those are the filaments that I use and why I use them. They're filaments I'm experimenting with. I actually have a bunch of other filaments. I have a Kevlar-filled ABS. I didn't mention Kevlar. I did not mention Kevlar nylon today because I don't have any. I don't have any experience with it. I do have a Kevlar ABS I was sent by Kimya. That is really interesting stuff. I appreciate them sending that over. I would like to try it here soon, see how it performs. I have PCTG. I've not been impressed. I have other filaments, so I just have not been that impressed by any of them. So these are the ones that I think are worth mentioning and talking about. And hopefully this video has been useful for you guys, and I will catch you guys again next time. So sure to stay tuned. Subscribe down below if you're not already subscribed. Leave a comment by all means, and I'll catch you again next time. Thank you so much for watching.